Hello everyone! In this video, we are going to pick up right where we left off in part 1. Here's a quick 20 or 30 second refresher on where we left off. Now at this point, let's change gears and focus on that Imagine Real Data Here text. Right? So if I create another sample post, hi, hey, hello, and go ahead and create. Let's adjust things so that this content that gets added to the page in real time on the fly perfectly matches the formatting for the other note posts. Now there are a lot of different ways of achieving that, but let me show you how I would do it. So back in our JavaScript, within our create note method, down within our success function, here's the sample test code that we're using at the moment, right? Imagine Real Data Here. Why don't we go ahead and delete that list item? And actually, instead of having quotes here to indicate a regular string, let's delete those and use backticks to indicate that we want to use a JavaScript template literal. And remember, one of the many advantages of a template literal is that you can drop down to a new line. And on this new line, let's just include HTML that perfectly matches the formatting for a note post interface. Now there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. We don't need to type out that HTML again. Instead, let's just jump into our page mynotes.php file, and right underneath the create new note form, remember we've got the unordered list with the list item for each note post user interface. So we can literally just copy and paste the list item, right? And that will give us the title and body field as well as the edit and delete buttons. So copy the whole LI, and then back in our JavaScript, within our template literal on the new line, I'm just going to paste it in. And now all we need to do is replace any of the PHP blocks with JavaScript expressions instead. So let's delete this first block of PHP that is responsible for outputting the ID number of the post that was just created. And if you're scratching your head and wondering, how are we supposed to fetch the ID of a post that was just created on the fly? Well, luckily, when you make a successful request to the WordPress REST API, it responds back with relevant data for that post. For example, back in the browser, remember I just filled out the form which created the post, and then we see this here. But if I check my browser's console, we see our congrats success message, but way more importantly, we see the official response from the REST API. The reason we see this is because back in our code, within our success function, remember we are saying console.log whatever the server responds with. And luckily for us, the server responds with every little bit of data about the post that we could wish for. So here's the ID number, here's the title, here's the content. So check this out. Back in our code, within our template literal, when we want to output the ID of the post, let's just open up a JavaScript expression, so $ curly brackets, and then just response to work with the data that WordPress sends back to us, and then dot whatever we're interested in, so .id. Cool, so let's just do the same thing for all of the other values. So for example, on this first input, that would need to be the title, right? We want to output the title of the post in this large blue font. So let's get rid of this PHP block, and instead, JavaScript expression. Let's say response dot, and you never need to memorize what to type. Just go back into your console. We can see that there's a title property with sub-properties named raw and rendered. We can dig into the difference between these two a bit more in the future, but for now, let's just go with the raw. So response.title.raw. Okay, next up is the text area that should have the body content. So scroll over, let's delete this PHP block, and instead open up a JavaScript expression and say response.content.raw. Okay, now at this point we can go ahead and save this file and test it out on the front end. So hello world 5000, hi there. Go ahead and create it. Perfect, and it slides down with the actual real data on the fly in real time. However, if you click on the Edit or Delete button, you'll notice that nothing happens. But if we click on the Edit or Delete button for a post that already existed a moment ago, that still works. Now, the reason for this is because these Edit and Delete buttons did not exist when the page first loaded, which means our JavaScript never set up event listeners for these buttons. Let me show you how we can fix this. So back in our JavaScript, up towards the top, within our events area, let's take this delete note event as an example. Now, when the page first loads, there might only be 1 or 2 notes, and only those 1 or 2 notes would actually be watching for this event, meaning this is not going to be on the lookout for future elements that match this selector. So instead, let's do this. Let's change the selector to look for an element with an ID of my notes, which is the unordered list which contains any present or future notes. Now check this out. We can add a third argument in between this and this. So right after click comma, I can add an X and another comma, and instead of an actual X, I can say quotes and then look for a class of delete note. So now what this line is saying is whenever you click anywhere within the parent unordered list, which will always exist when the page first loads, if the actual interior element that you clicked on matches this selector, well, then fire off our callback method. Okay, let's do the same thing for edit note and update note. So let's change the initial selector to the overall list with an ID of my notes. Then let's add an additional argument of a selector with a class of edit note. Okay, and finally for update note, let's change this initial selector to my notes, add an additional argument of a selector for a class, update note. Okay, let's go ahead and save this and test it out. So maybe a title of Cats Love Math, Lorem Ipsum, go ahead and create it. Okay, it gets added to the page in real time, and now let's try out the buttons. Okay, that brings up the edit interface. Let's change this to Dogs Love Math. Click the Save button. Cool, and just for proof that it's working, if I refresh the backend notes screen, there we see Dogs Love Math, and why don't we test out the on-the-fly delete button. So in real time, it was removed from the page visually. And also, if we check the back end and refresh, Dogs Love Math disappears. And we can see one item in the trash. Beautiful. And this means that we have successfully learned how to create brand new posts from the front end of a website, which is going to bring this lesson to a close. Keep in mind, though, that at the moment, only administrator or editor accounts are able to actually create notes. And our entire goal was to let users of the subscriber role create and manage their notes. So in our next lesson, we are going to give the subscriber role permission to create, edit, and delete private notes. And we are going to learn how to do this in a way that doesn't hurt the security or speed performance of our website. So let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.